Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Mapbox Developer Spotlight video. I'm Chris Wong, Senior Developer Evangelist here at Mapbox, and I'm joined by Dan McCarey, who's a spatial developer and designer working with a company called Ona, and they're here to tell us today about a product called Akuko. But before we do that, Dan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hi. So I'm Dan McCarey. I've been building user interfaces and applications for about the last decade. I'm interested in both the way that data flows to components like maps and also the design and UX around data applications and so data experiences.
Awesome. So before we hear about Akuko, can you tell us a bit about Ona? So Ona is the company, Akuko is the product. We're going to hear about Akuko in a minute here, but tell us more about Ona and what Ona does.
So Ona basically is headquartered in Nairobi, has a few US-based staff as well, and others scattered around the world. And they work primarily in the humanitarian space. They have a flagship product called Ona Data, which a lot of people who work in humanitarian pieces use. It's basically like a way to collect data on the ground in the field, often without an internet connection, and come back and then sync that, and all of the challenge, kind of all the pieces and challenges that involves.
Excellent. So the Akuko platform is a data storytelling platform, if I understand it correctly. So we'd love to hear, I guess, just see a quick demo. If you can give us a share screen and tell us what it can do, and I'll interject with some questions if I have any. But yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So Akuko is a product that we started building almost 3 years ago now. And yeah, the way that we kind of describe it to folks who are new to it is that essentially Akuko is like a data storytelling platform, but it does like a bunch of different things. We kind of think of it as the top of like the modern data stack. So if you think of like the modern data stack as like a bunch of things under the hood that are sort of connecting to various different data sources and then caching and all of that stuff, Akuko is the bit that sits right at the top. It just deals with the visual kind of publishing side, but it has the ability to connect all these different bits and wrangle your data for you. But so it's primarily like a data visualization tool, but a new kind of data visualization tool. And so it's actually a pretty simple product, sort of conceptually, in the sense that it just exists of posts and sources. So what I'm showing here is like a post in a kind of like a notebook format. If it has a map and a chart and some text, you can sort of so more like a sort of like standard blog format. But then the other thing that's, I can show you a couple of examples of that. So like here's another one. And each of these are sort of components. Like if I go into editing mode, I can go in and I can edit the text, etc. I can edit the map and see all the different settings that are related to that. I'll come back to this again in a minute. But one of the other cool things about Akuko is that you're not limited to a notebook format. So if you want to, you can make the map your primary canvas, and you can start to build experiences that are much more map centric. And it's all using the same, under the hood, everything's the same. It's all just different components. But what's really cool is you can sort of start to combine map, charts and tables and things like that with your map canvas. So it allows you to build things like this one, which is like a demo we built on global power plants. What's kind of cool about this is that if I go in here and select like a country, like India, for example, what happens is obviously I get the thing will filter to India, but then the chart will also update to tell me the distribution of like, power plants in India. So this kind of ability to have your data in sync, both with the map and in a chart, is something that one of the problems that we're really trying to solve with Akuko, so that we can make that stuff kind of easier. Here's another example based on sort of service mapping. This is a project with the IRC that we're discussing with them at the moment. And then here's another one that we built off the New York Times, which is basically mapping wildfires out west. And you can see that all of this is configurable through the UI, but we have we also recently built in like an events type system that allows you to do things like zoom to specific points and have cards over here that, will take you to places, etc.
Yeah, having built all this kind of stuff from scratch many times over, I'm sure you've done the same. So it sounds like you're, basically democratizing a lot of the advanced functionality of interactive web maps and opening up to a new audience. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, particularly one of the things we think a lot about is, and this comes from the works, the kind of context that a lot of owners work in, is that it's a lot of it's humanitarian related, responding to disasters, responding to famines. And so one of the things that's crucial in that context is speed. So obviously everything like I'm showing here and everything you can build with Akuko, you could also build on your own, like with a custom, if you're a developer, or if you could hire a custom developer. But one of the things, so we're not trying to replace sort of custom web development, but what we are trying to do is make it super easy for certain types of organizations to create stuff really rapidly, like in minutes and hours, and then publish it and use it to solve a real issue or respond to an emergency, that kind of thing.
What comes to mind also is that I think there are a lot of like foot guns or things that you can do to shoot yourself in the foot when you're building an interactive web map. There's a lot of UI like UX best practices that you only pick up after doing lots and lots of these. So it seems like you're also kind of steering people in the right direction to make decent maps without having a whole lot of design background.
Exactly. I mean, that's definitely like one of the sort of primary goals is to try to help, try to build a platform that helps you create stuff rapidly, but also help you make sensible design decisions and UX decisions. And one of the things that, is crucial in that kind of equation, obviously, is that particularly if you're working with large data sets, is like making stuff work quickly and making sure that it doesn't take 15 seconds for a filter to update. And so we're trying to basically like abstract away all of that part, so that's less of an issue for you, and you can focus more just on presenting your data and building the experience that you want for the audience you're working with. Yeah. And then just quickly behind the scenes, so if you create an Akuko account, basically what you're going to get is a list like this, which contains all the different posts that you have. The map view that I showed and the notebook, it's all the same thing, they're all posts. And then the only other part of this is your sources. So this is essentially where you connect your data. And you can upload a CSV, GeoJSON. We also have an owner data connector, which is the other flagship product that owner owns. But this is where all your data is essentially going to get managed. We also connect to Google Sheets as well, so you can do those too. And there are more sources in the pipeline or options as well. We also have the other crucial thing. We also have public sources too. So if you have data in the CSV, for example, you want to bring it to Akuko, you can actually just search for like a geometry, and then you can just join your CSV directly with those admin boundaries, and so you don't necessarily need to come with the geometry. We're slowly adding more and more of the sort of standard administrative geometries. So yeah, that's still a work in progress, but that's the idea, so that you can just to facilitate that, make it a bit easier. Yeah, so this post is interesting. One of the sort of basic things that is cool about Akuko is that because we're managing on the state of your data, if you actually upload a GeoJSON, what we do is pull out the properties, and they end up separately from your geometry as well. So what that means is we can do a lot of stuff where you're basically presenting the same data on your map as exists in the components around it. And what's really cool about this is that if if I drag this slider, for example, you'll see that all the numbers in the charts update. And what's not really nice about this is that if you build this just regularly, if you were to do this in a custom build, what can become problems is, you end up with data outside of your map not being in sync with the tiles that are in your map because the data's got updated and things like this. So this is actually one of the problems that we've been trying to solve with Akuko, so that you can basically grab the same data source, put it on your map, put it into charts or number components around it, filter it, and then be confident that they're always going to be, the state of those are going to always be the same. So you get the same results based on same aggregations, etc., without having to worry about stale data in the map, or etc. Yeah.
Excellent. I'm getting flashbacks from trying to build, I think that we called it cross filters back in the, 10 years ago, and really blowing our minds. So this is really great. And I think, what also comes to mind when I see this is that like maps are truly like a first-class citizen in this as a tool, and not something that's an afterthought that you have to kind of add in later, which we might find with other approaches to doing this kind of dashboarding. So really well done. Beautiful. So what would you say are some of the biggest pain points of the digital map making process that Akuko helps to address?
Yeah, so I think there's two or three core ones, and I think the first one that I would probably say is that we have created like a technique for basically doing dynamic vector tiles. So we're basically abstracting. Once if a user uploads a GeoJSON file to Akuko, they can then go to a map and render that on the map in tiles. So we're not talking rendering GeoJSON. We're talking actual vector tiles rendered on the map, and they don't have to do anything else beyond upload that GeoJSON file. Everything else is taken care of behind the scenes. We can talk more about how we do that in a second. But I think that one of the big benefits for that is that because we're also pulling any like properties that you have in your features out and making it so that you can effectively query those using SQL. Although that's also, we can talk more about that, but that's also you don't actually have to write the SQL. We have a third-party headless BI tool that's doing that for you. But what it means is that your data, again, the data in your tiles and the data, if you build a table to go alongside them, it's always going to be in sync. So we're just removing the problem of having static tiles and then having to go back and then refresh those tiles. So I think that just trying to make that piece simple is a big part of what we're trying to do. And I should just caveat with that is that obviously, we're not trying to make a workflow that is anti-tile, or like I said, the vast majority of stuff that's rendered in Akuko is rendered in vector tiles, regardless of the size or how many points you have. But what we've noticed in our work is that often, what I'm trying to say is there's a limitation to this approach. Like, it works for a certain threshold of data. Like, we're not trying to render at this point like gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of GeoJSON data. What we're talking about is a solution that works really well for GeoJSON files of let's say under 100 megabytes and down. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of that's the kind of sweet spot that we're trying to sort of work with right now. So yeah, yeah.
Oh, on the same front, as I mentioned earlier, it sounds like the first-class citizen thing is true. Like, it sounds like bringing GeoJSON data, you're not treating it through a spatial pipeline. It's there, but it's the data that's in there can also then be used for chart building and everything else, right?
Exactly, and I think brings me to the second point, which is this issue of being able to have essentially all the data in your map in context all the time. So just a challenge with a challenge that's specific to vector tiles, right? Like, if you're just working with vector tiles, whether they're coming from Mapbox Tiles API or anywhere else, you're often limited. If you're just working with those things, like you're building a map, you're often limited to the data that's in the viewport. So you can query the data in the tiles, but getting the entire data set from the map as a whole can often be problematic, depending on the type of application you're building. So again, it's just that idea that in Akuko, if you have a data source and you have a geometry and you're rendering that geometry on a map, you always have access to all of the data. And because of the headless BI tool we're using and the sort of pipeline we have in place, it's super fast to access it as well. So it's I think that for building map applications where you're often having to add your user interface elements around the side that reference the data in the map, that makes things, that really just removes that issue, which can be helpful. So you don't need to set up how I would do that as a developer previously is that often I'd either have to hit a static JSON file with just the data in it, or have some kind of other additional API that handled the data. So it sort of just simplifies that problem for folks who maybe aren't going to want to have to set up all those kinds of things. And then the third one, I think, and this one's again really important for what we're trying to do, is that just building maps, particularly sort of relatively complex or even simple, it's sort of interactive maps and publishing them to the web. It just takes time right now. And I think that again, so one of the crucial pieces of this is we're just really trying to create a system where building, replicating, publishing these things can be done quickly and without, I guess, without necessarily the need for a developer either to create, to go in and edit code or to take a final product and then deploy it as well.
Actually, I meant to ask, is this going to be like open to the public? Is it you just sign up and start using it, or is that coming soon, or is it available now?
Yeah, so right now we basically have a public beta, so anybody can go sign up. Shortly we're going to be moving to out of like that public beta into more like of an official free tier. And basically the way we're going to divide it is that there's like essentially our vision at the moment anyway is that like you can pretty much get the whole product and use it for free as an individual user. If you want to use it as for your organization and collaborate with other folks like in your team and have posts that more than one person can access, that will be like, that's basically going to be the paid tier. But
so what would you say are the biggest differentiators between something like Akuko, which you've built, and more common BI tools that include maps?
Yeah, so I think again, like you already kind of mentioned this as we were talking, but I think one of the main things is that we really built Akuko as map first. That was entirely intentional all along. Like we built that out of the frustration of using other tools and finding that the mapping just wasn't where we wanted it to be. And you kind of feel that if you use other tools, often it kind of feels like, and I mean, it's true, often these tools existed before modern web mapping did. And so they've kind of tacked them on. And it means you can only go so far. Usually, often in these tools, your data is being rendered directly as GeoJSONs on your layers, which immediately limits the scale which you can do and how quickly maps load, etc. So yeah, I think that's right now that would be the biggest differentiator, followed closely by the fact that again, in a lot of tools, it's actually pretty hard to make them map your canvas and but then build entirely on a map. So again, I think that's another important piece that we're trying to make easier. So I would, and then I mean, I think, and then the third part, I guess, which is also important, would be that often again in other tools, like one of the pain points we experience is that the published experience of those things is often not that good. So I'm talking about publishing to the web. So often like if you want to customize branding and stuff like that, either you can't or you're going to have to pay a huge amount of money to be able to do that. We're trying to create again. We're trying to create something where it's free to publish. We're not going to put a premium on you trying to like share something easily. Yeah, so I think those would be the three big differences right now, I think.
Awesome. So I mean, these will work as dashboards in a boardroom, but the first user story is more to tell a story out in the public on the internet. Does that sound right?
I think so. Like, yeah, I mean, but I mean, we support both the sort of internal private use case and the published one. But I think what we felt like if you look around these tools, it's definitely harder, and the experience is not usually good if you build something and then you try to publish it to the web. It's either slow or expensive or limitations on having branding of the other product all over it, etc.
So you mentioned that your configuration UI is kind of a scaled down Mapbox Studio when we talked earlier. So this is you're trying to do kind of GIS functionality and a lot of like deep styling logic and that sort of stuff. So what kinds of design considerations come into play when you're building a really complex UI like this?
Yeah, and I think it's for us as well. This is something that we're definitely still actively working on. And I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges. I think just the first thing I'd say is that like building, particularly if your goal is to build a simple user interface for creating maps, I think that's really difficult. Like maps are, unless you're talking about super basic maps are pretty complicated, and there's a lot of potential settings that you might want to expose. And the more power you add, obviously, the more complex your UI gets, which makes it harder to learn, which makes them more intimidating, and that cycle. So it definitely is. I think it, and I don't, I think what we have is where we've got to, as over the process of we rebuilt our UI. God knows how many, I don't know, 10 or 15 times in the last 3 years, and I'm just going to get rebuilt again. So I think we're still figuring that out. I think, but there are a few things that I think there are a few things that I do think are interesting about this. For example, particularly in relation to maps. So like that's why we've opted for so some of the choices we made, for example, were to opt for a persistent sidebar where your settings are, and to keep that sidebar to keep all of the elements and settings and things within that sidebar. So we're not opening dozens of modules over the map. And this is like for one really simple reason, is that the more stuff you open up and cover, the less you have to see your map, right? And that's the challenge, I think, particularly for the map UIs, is that there's definitely so many different bits of settings and menus and things that you can expose, but it's like the more complex and the more you open those out, the less you see your map. And I think particularly just nowadays when users expect stuff to be reactive, they expect to see their changes happening and occurring in real time. You've got to really, if you can find a way not to give too much real estate to settings, but to keep the primary view on the map itself, then I think that's something we've worked hard to do, and I think it makes for a better building experience.
And you mentioned you're combining vector tiles from your own backend after the data comes in, and then you're rendering with Mapbox GL JS. Can you tell us a bit more about how the data is flowing through your whole stack and any other Mapbox tools and services that are part of that process?
Yeah, so this is like a really abstracted diagram just of Akuko as a whole. Basically, we have we have a microservice architecture, so we have a bunch of different APIs powering all the different pieces of this. And then we have a bunch of different sort of storage solutions. Our database for the application is Postgres, but then we also have a lot of shared file system storage, which is important to the tiles. I'll come back to that. So basically, and what's nice about this is we just moved all this into Kubernetes, so now we can any of these services can scale horizontally. So when we're talking about the tile service, we might be talking about 3, 4, 5, 6 different pods that are all running the tiles API, which is going to become important in a second. So just keep that in mind. So then this slide is like, again, a sort of abstraction of the tile service. So basically it's when one of the, so basically the underlying core piece of our tiles service is this module called GeoJSON VT, which was was what Mapbox built 6 or 7 years ago. I think it was Vlad who built it, but it was it basically, what it does is you can pass it a GeoJSON file, and it'll generate vector tiles or vector tile format on the fly, and then provide you with the vector tiles that you can then attach to a Mapbox instance, or an instance of Mapbox map. So, and you can run it in the browser, or you can run it in on a server. So, which is what we're doing. And so basically the piece that we had to add to this as well. So essentially, what comes in is that a map has a layer, and if the layer has an ID. So basically, what it does is it makes a request to the tile service, and then what happens is if the tile's not currently in the memory cache, what it'll do is it'll go grab the GeoJSON file. So that's what this geometry's like storage on the right is. And basically, it'll grab the GeoJSON file, push it through GeoJSON VT, which literally is incredibly fast and takes a second or so, and then immediately caches it and then sends it back to the browser. So why this is important is because if we were just basically had a pipeline where every layer was always hitting getting the GeoJSON and then pushing it through GeoJSON VT, it would that wouldn't, that we're just using so much like compute power just to generate for every request. Essentially, you'd be retiling your GeoJSON essentially for every request, which obviously makes no sense at all. So what we do is we have this like memory cache in front, which actually sits on the actual pod, and basically it's like a temporary memory cache, so it'll keep it in there for a period of time, which will serve the map, the map currently being rendered. Let's say the user, like maybe that post is getting a lot of traffic, for example, so like thousands of views a minute. That each of those requests is going to be hitting the memory cache it's not regenerating the tiles. But then after that traffic dies down, half an hour later, that tile set will get removed from the cache, so the next request will come in, it'll get retiled and then sent back. And what's cool about this is because we're often dealing with projects where the data is being updated, so Akuko isn't really yet designed for data that's in real time. We're not looking second to second decision making, but stuff that is updating on like, maybe 30-minute basis and stuff like that. What's really nice about this is that because the tiles are not persistent, to the point that we just bake them and they sit there, once the cache is, once they remove from the temporary cache, the next request comes in, it'll get repushed through, and then it will have the fresh data as well. So it's kind of like, that's one of the benefits to doing it like this, because it means that we're not having to sort of coordinate a lot of static tiles that need to be rebuilt and then figuring out how to do that piece of it. There are pros and cons, obviously, to different approaches, but that's pretty much how we're doing it. And we've been doing it this way pretty much since we started using Akuko, and so far we're super happy with it. Like it works well, and now horizontally scales in K8s, which is nice. That was a challenge previously.
Excellent. Quick question, because you said when you're pulling it out of the EFS on the right, it's GeoJSON already. So for the parallel process of having the charts update, is that also coming from, like, is it stored as GeoJSON and then also stored again as a tabular format so it's easier to make those charts, or is it GeoJSON powers everything?
Yeah, so no, it's separated. So basically, like if you look at this one, we have a bunch of like different EFS instances that we use for file system storage, and but basically we have the sort of simple way to get this is we have a bucket that has a bunch of data in it, and we have a bucket that has a bunch of geometries in it. Now the data is often the data one could be interesting because it could be coming from like Postgres, for example. Like you can use Postgres as a source, or it could be a CSV file. But basically, our latest, and we've changed this process over time. The current one, it's kind of exciting, is that for stuff so basically for anything that's like data coming from a Google Sheet, or data coming from a CSV file, or data coming from a JSON, basically what we do is to grab the data, turn it into Parquet. So we're using the Parquet format, and then we actually push it into ClickHouse. So ClickHouse is a NoSQL, no column database that is super fast. So a lot of the times what's happening with your Akuko posts is that your data is coming from ClickHouse, and your geometry is GeoJSON. But the key thing to understand about this is that we're storing your data in ClickHouse so you can put it in tables and query it and etc. But what we do when you upload a GeoJSON, and this is why GeoJSON is so crucial to us right now, is that we do a couple of things. Like for one, we pull the properties out, but we also run sort of sanitization over your property names, or your column names, so they're all in sync. So when you go to your map, you can pick a property to show as a label or whatever, and then you go across to your table. That they have to be the same. Yeah, no, the only other thing I wanted to say is just like we're still, we're definitely looking for, we'd love for folks to go try this out, but just like with the caveat that we're still, there still can be dead ends, and things like that, and so yeah, it's not like they're still in beta. So.
Sure. So we'll definitely put a link in the YouTube video in the description. So you heard it here first. Go try out Akuko platform and throw some data at it and see what you can present. And I'm sure Dan and his colleagues would love to hear about it on Twitter, or anywhere else so you can publish it. So go ahead and do that. All right, so that'll wrap us up for this developer spotlight with Dan McCarey of the Akuko platform by the company Ona. So thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for coming today, Dan.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Okay, we'll see you at the next one. Take care, everyone.